welcome to Drinks Coach. This is a big, as you can tell from the backdrop and everything, this is a glamorous end of year episode. Something I've been wanting to do for a long time. For those watching who have been generous enough to send me samples in the past, Clementine, High West, and the lovely Marchin Miller for Field and Whiskey. They've been in the house for a while, and it's been every effort in my bones to not drink them all. So I've still got some left to do this talk. Yes, today we're going to talk about rye, rye whiskey, whiskey made from rye, a cereal that's not malted barley. So, all right, very, very quickly, because this is going to be a shallow dive for those that I think probably want to know the basic questions, but are too embarrassed to ask. So hopefully I'll answer most of them for you. I'm no expert, but I'm a lover of them. And I particularly like straight rye whiskies in America. It's a very interesting category and one that's buoyant currently. So the rye whiskey, you can make whiskey from any cereal. You can make whiskey from molasses. You can make whiskey from anything really. But uh, most fine whiskey is made from malted barley in Scotland. That's what a single malt is made from malted barley. We call it malted barley. You never hear anybody say malted wheat or malted rye or malted spelt because they don't malt. Barley has a unique enzyme that if you get the humidity and temperature right, it turns the starch in the grains into sugar. And that's what I mean by germination or malting, because you end up with this taste of malt sugar inside, and that's the very sugar that you use to make beer. Okay, with me so far. So, how do you make other drinks? Well, you start off with some germinated malt, and that then the enzyme and the chemical biochemical process will go into the other grains and take their simple starches and turn those into sugars. Things like bourbon. I think a lot of people who drink whiskey in the UK think that they're made from the same material, but they're not. Bourbon has been made from 51% corn, maize, which of course America's covered in. Like just imagine the whole of America covered in cornflakes, right? Um, and it has a very different result. It has very different texture, very different flavor profile. But bourbon has to be 51% uh, corn or maize, and straight rye, by a similar definition, follows similar laws and has to be 51% rye. But the rest of what we call the mash bill, the recipe for the whiskey, could be with wheat, without wheat, because a lot of bourbons aren't wheaten at all, and it may well have some rye, it may have some barley in it, and those are the things that kind of make up the leftovers. And every mash bill is slightly different, every recipe is slightly different, and they all have slightly different ways of achieving similar results. But bourbon isn't limited to Louisville, Kentucky, which a lot of people think it is. You can make bourbon anywhere, and ditto with other whiskies. Straight ryes famously come from Philadelphia and Maryland. It's where whiskey making kind of started in the States. I'm pretty sure that's true. Also, straight rye often depends on you buying. You can be a brand that buys and maybe makes a little bit or grows a little bit of rye and distills a bit of rye, but probably adds it to rye they're already purchasing from elsewhere. And a lot of rye in straight rye whiskies in America comes from Canada. Canadian Club is a very famous brand. When I grew up, it was probably the most famous brand of whiskey in the world. And that's a very light example of a Canadian rye whiskey. But when you taste things like Michter's 10-year-old, yeah, absolutely extraordinary drinks. They're also made, funny enough, from a Canadian source rye. So it's a very, very complicated subject. What's in the bottle needs to be explained carefully to you, and I think I'm starting to understand from drinking different ryes what affects what flavour. Also, in terms of style, if you compare a rye to a bourbon, I mean, this is this is my own way of looking at it. So if you're thinking, oh, that's not how I see it at all, well, that'd be you, and everyone's got their own subjective taste, sort of ideas. But bourbon for me, the cornness has a rich sweetness, has a sweetness that maize kernels have, and there's a fruity sweetness to it, which works very well with the bourbon of new casks, of new barrels, and most bourbons in aged 100% new casks. And rye has a spiciness to it. Now, depending on who you believe, and there are some rye whiskies out there, famous ones like Whistle Pig, which was bought by Moet Hennessy of all people. It's quite prestigious company making most of the champagne in France. They're now buying up very, very fine distilleries around the world, making different whiskies and so forth, um, and rums and brandies. The um, the spice profile isn't as obvious when rye is fermented with clarity and distilled with precision. It's almost as if the spiciness component is almost like a mistake, an offcut, a bit like if you buy German Riesling. Famously, if you drink a German Riesling that's 3 or 4 years old, it can smell a bit petrolly, and that used to be the ident for German Riesling. But of course, Riesling all over the world can smell petrolly, and it depends on how you make it. And very pristine Riesling, J.J. Prum or Grosset in Australia, doesn't have the smell of petrol at all. So you can also look at petrol being a fault in the wine. They're just aldehydes and aromatics, which don't necessarily have to be there if things are made with absolute precision. We'll see that spiciness in its very highs and its very lows in this lineup. But I've got 4 ryes for you to try. And I'm going to keep this thing going. I don't want to make this long like all the others. I promise you that every time I fail. Right, we're going to start off with this lovely whiskey. Have I said enough about whiskey? Is that clear? All right, just to recap very quickly. So whiskey is just cereals. As I said, malted barley, wheat, rye, um, whatever they are. Then you make a beer out of it. You ferment it. The sugars, which have been germinated or malted using this enzyme from malted barley, and then you've got a beer, which doesn't taste like normal beer, but then you distill that beer, and you've got whiskey. You've got a clear spirit though. It doesn't come out beer color. It comes out like brandy. It then gets put into casks, either new casks, casks that have had sherry in before, casks had pilchers in before, who knows? French casks, which are very tight and produce a fruity, dry structure, bourbon Kentucky casks, which have a big, sweet vanilla flavor profile, and everything in between. So there you go. There you go. That's how whiskey's made, and it's aged in those barrels for anything between like 2 years, depending on the whiskey, right up to whatever 50 years, and they cost a fortune when they get over about 20. So, without further ado, here are 4 lovely rye whiskies, and I'm really sorry to those people um, who've been waiting for me to do these whiskies. I'll start with you, Clemence. This is from Clementine Communications. I went to their um, uh, summer sort of Christmas presentation, what they're going to be showing at Christmas. And I was fortunate enough to meet the brand ambassador from High West Whiskey. They're also associated with very high quality tequila, in fact. But High West Whiskey, as you can see, whiskey spelt with an E, like in Ireland, not in Scotland. And this whiskey is made in Utah. This is absolutely one of my favorite distilleries in America, and they are going quite self-proclaimedly going for the spiciest ryes they can, and they're very proud of making rye. And they also make very fine bourbon too. But the ryes, I think, are their house specialty. Also, it's in Utah, up in the mountains, in the ski resorts. You can ski to this distillery, have dinner, a few cocktails, have a look around, put the skis on, and attempt the rest of the descent, um, laden upward, straight rye. Um, it was quite entertaining to watch. Anyway, we have this lovely whiskey. I'm going to pour some, and this one's called Double Rye! Exclamation mark. It's quite fun that the exclamation mark's there, like Sutton Hoo! Exclamation mark. It's a part of the name. Um, Double wood or double something often tends to refer to the fact that the same whiskey's been aged twice in different casks, but that's not what they're doing here. They're producing rye whiskey 2 different ways. They've got a very interesting still, which can be both used as a continuous column still or as a pot still, which are the 2 different ways of distilling spirits. One produces fruitier, less uh, terpenous and deep and spicy, but maybe floral and smoother spirits in the continuous still, a coffee still, whatever. And then you've got the pot still, which produces very chewy, spicy flavors. Here, they mix them together. That's why it's called double rye! Exclamation mark, which is rather clever. And the whiskies are over 3 years old. Let's have a look. Ah, dude, it's spicy. I mean, this is about as spicy as whiskey's ever going to get. When we talk about spice, what do we mean? It's really feisty spice. I mean, we're not talking about, oh, it smells a little bit of cinnamon. We're talking like dried powdered ginger, or even stem ginger. It kind of tickles the nose a little. There's a kind of rooty raughtiness that almost reminds me of galangal or ginseng or something. But rye whiskey or rye dominant mash bills tend to um, be less obviously fruity, I think, initially. but tend to have a more sappy. I get the taste of almost like saffron and straw bales, which have a funky sweetness to them. Um, but there's also a nice dried apple component, some quince, and this one's got some very nice wood notes. But the wood is not as extant as it is in other examples, which I'm going to show you. But delicate. I don't know if the altitude has anything to do with that, because if you're distilling at altitude, which they are, Utah, spirits distill at lower temperatures. So I imagine there's a very different profile simply because of the geography of this distillery. And here we've got a drink which is wonderfully bouncy and light on its feet. I think it would make a stunning Manhattan, actually. I'm pretending I don't know that, but I do. It makes a very nice Manhattan, and also can be used in some really wonderful drinks. One of which I'm probably going to do a short of after this, which is a Sunny Jim, which is a Boulevardier. I got this wrong on the last episode. I know at the moment I stopped recording that I'd said something wrong. But if you get a Negroni and swap out the gin for bourbon, you get a drink called a Boulevardier, which gives you a whole new list of potential drinks that you can experiment with. It's like a winter Negroni, more cuddly and malty and sweet, rather than those fresh, zingy fruit flavors you get in a Negroni. But if you swap out bourbon with rye, I believe it's called a Sunny Gin. And it was a friend of mine, Andre, great cocktail bartender, who made my first Sunny Gin at Quo Vadis in London, which was being managed all those years ago by Paul Mant, who now is living in Australia, I believe. And it was voted the third best cocktail bar in the world. If you get the opportunity to go in with a member into Quo Vadis in Soho in London, it's still a very special spot, and was Karl Marx's house. Yeah, there we go. It is young though. You can feel the youth. Okay, next up. Oh, but price wise, I think you're not messing around the pit below 50 quid. I think it's probably 50 and 60, somewhere in between. If you get this for £50, I think it's well priced. Moving on to this. This is a name and a bottle you might be familiar with. Yes. You know, yeah. Jack Daniels number 7. Anyone? Jack Daniels gets such a load of shade. People go, "Oh, who drinks that rubbish anymore?" That's Jack Daniels not rubbish. I refuse to believe it's rubbish. It still makes great drinks. It's just young, and they make it an unbelievable scale. And it's made in a place where you can't drink. This is the big joke that actually the distillery is in a place called Lynchburg, which is a dry part of Tennessee. You can't drink there. So you have to go over the border of the state into another state back to Kentucky in order to be able to drink the drinks legally. But the black bottle label is a bottle that you see in every supermarket. About retails in the UK for about £27. So any Americans watching this, or people in Taiwan or Vietnam who are whiskey enthusiasts, let me just spell it out for you. A regular bottle of Jack Daniels in the UK costs around $35 to $40, about $40. I think it's $16 in the States. Just so you know, we have to spend a lot of money on our whiskey, and as from February, because of Rishi Sunak, our former Prime Minister, we're going to have to spend a lot more money on our wine. We're going to have the highest taxed what wine tax is in Europe. I don't know whether we deserve that. We really don't. Anyway, so this is Jack Daniel's Bonded Rye. It's got a green label. So this is a straight rye rather than the Jack Daniel's whiskey, which is mostly corn. And it goes through the same processes. There's a process called the Lincoln County process, which I'll explain in a minute, to make the drink smoother. But this is a really brilliant whiskey. Again, you see Jack Daniels, you think, oh, it's going to be cheap. It's not. And Jack Daniels have um, premium expressions, Gentleman Jack, Small Batch, whatever it's called. Um, there are different kinds of Jack Daniels which are really worth the extra money. And it proves the prowess and the expertise they have at this distillery, one of the largest in the world, obviously. But they started making whiskey back in 1866, and you know they're not going anywhere anytime soon. This is a bond-proof bonded rye whiskey. So this is 100 degrees proof, so it's 50% compared to the regular pour, which I believe is 40. Should be, I think, less than 40. It's not bourbon anymore, or even straight rye. So this is kind of an upgrade. It's one of the whiskies which actually looks, it's very recently added to the lineup, and is about 40. £45 maybe somewhere. I mean, if you're getting this for 40 quid, that's about right. And you just don't, just because you see the bottle, don't go, oh, it's Jack Daniels, and be snobbish about it. Because first of all, Jack Daniels ain't as bad as you're making out. But B, this stuff is serious whiskey. Okay, this is really, really lovely whiskey. Thank you very much to Anthony Heatley, who sent this to me, who's looking after um, a series of different brands. There's also the next one as well. He looks after the spirits exports in America, the United States. I think it's a government appointed um, um, I don't know what do you call it, department called Discus. But he's at Cutlass Communications who are responsible for this, and I'm very, very grateful. He sent me some lovely whiskies this Christmas. Anyway, so here we are. This is Jack Daniels Bonded Rye. First thing on the nose, I'm getting quite a lot of aldehyde. It's a little bit kind of spicy in a kind of a fruity vinegar sort of way. It almost smells like balsamic. Um, initially, and I think that's maybe partly because the way that the drink's processed. Because let's go back to this Lincoln County process I was talking about. They make their whiskies, and the vast majority of Jack Daniels is 2 years. I mean, they're making huge volumes, huge demand. So it is aged to what I imagine is basically the bare minimum. But the older whiskies, obviously, and the higher and more expensive expressions of Jack Daniels have had more time in the rick house and more care. It's just age, really, which is the difference between basic Jack and the more expensive Jacks. And this smells young, it certainly does. It has plenty of exciting fruit and spicy characteristics on the nose, very spicy as you expect from rye. Um, the Lincoln County process, they wash it with sugar maple. I think it used to be washed with toasted coconuts, which was the first attempt to do that back in the day. But they use a charcoal wash, which takes out some of the unwanted aldehydes. You could argue it takes away some of the wanted ones too, but you can't have your cake and eat it. You know, you just got to decide whether you want the drink smoother and cleaner or whether you want the full shebang. And I think that um, it's a way of doing things, and sometimes it's very, very successful. And Uncle Nearest, which is a whiskey, which is, although I'm not sure I'm legally allowed to say this, is kind of associated by history with Jack Daniels, also does this process, and I think they're both fantastic whiskies. So, Bonded Rye, 50%, here goes. It's sweeter, it's got a smoother, kind of slightly more vanillin center. It's almost like there's an icing sugar touch to it, like there's a lift away from the real severe dryness that sometimes rye shows. Into coconut, like coconut, maybe dried coriander spice. Um, yeah, definitely got some dried fruits in there. A little bit of dried mango, I would say, and very decent length. The one thing you don't get from a low proof bourbon or straight rye or straight whiskey like Jack Daniels is length, but this has got lots and lots of follow through and persistence, and is really a lot grander than the expression and the experience you probably have from buying your regular Black Label number 7. But yes, do seek this out. Show it off to people. I think it's really impressive. Absolutely delicious rye. There you go. So, High Western Utah, Jack in Lynchburg in Tennessee. Now we're going on to Sagamore Spirit. Sagamore Spirit's been around for a while, but this is the one I knew least about because it's the most recently available in the UK. And this is just a new expression of the drink. It comes in this amazing Art Deco bottle. Sagamore Spirit, all these lovely, wonderful angles and some checks and things on it. Sagamore Spirit, spring fed, it says. So they must have their own borehole. Look at that. Rye, it's not actually kind of pretending it's not what it is. And it's been double oaked. I think aged in two different kinds of oak. I could probably tell you off the back. What's the quickest way to tell you the information? I can't retain all this anymore. Well, first of all, the one thing to know is if you're going to buy it in the UK, you probably have to buy it from someone like Master of Malt, and it's going to cost you 75 quid. This is fancy. A very, very dear friend of mine who I met on a cruise, um, Terry, very kindly came over recently to the UK and brought with him some nice whiskies for me to try. 'Cause he knew I'm passionate about the subject, and one of them was from a local distillery in Texas where he lives. I think he's in Lubbock, but I don't know where Garrison Brothers are. But those people loving spirits, I don't think you can get it in the UK yet. But he bought me a boot flask, like a half bottle of Garrison Brothers bourbon, and it is fire. It tasted like drinking um, horse saddle leather. It had such a leathery spice, such a deep molasses chew to it, and it had this kind of funk, which I thought was wonderful, like the smell of freshly cut leather jacket or something. It was really wonderful, and that was from the amount of oak. They really did napalm it with oak, but because it had a high proof strength and also it was very, very concentrated in its flavors, it could handle all of that. It's not an everyday drink. I wouldn't drink Garrison bourbon every day, but I'd certainly show it off to people if they were feeling cold one day in front of the rugby. I'd pop my hip flask and go, "Here, try a shifty of this. Tell me what you think." Um, uh, it's not for the faint-hearted. And this that brings me on to this. So this is more refined and more elegant, I think, at this price. Um, this is I don't know what the strength was again. I think it's about 100 proof, 96.6 proof, which is what was that in half? 48.3, of course. Um, you see from the colour, much much more going on with this one. That was the Jack, and then that is the Sagamore Spirit. And I think that age might be a component here. Maybe it's 4 or 5 years old. Um, Certainly with the price, I imagine that that's an indication both of the higher ABV and maybe possibly longer in the Rick House. There's a signature rye which took the world by storm actually, but they've been making it for a long time. I think it was 1909. I think was they claim was it's stamped on the bottle anyway. Um, um, but this is the original kind of style. I think this is the Maryland style, not the Philadelphia or style of bourbon of rye. This is a kind of a sweeter, more puddingy, more digestive like style of rye. Smell, it's got lovely smells. A little bit of smell of pine, chocolate, maple syrup, like almost running down a tree. You can almost smell it. The smell of the oak is extant there. Got lovely sort of vanilla tones. Cannelle, little spiced French pudding breads. Mm. It is smooth. I mean, considering the amount of flavour and stuff that it delivers, and for the ABV, it's also very long. It grows in the mouth. Very different to the other two. Uber spicy, spicy and fruity, maybe the more versatile one. And then here you've got something you want to sit down in front of a fire and tell people to shut up and say that you're reading a nice book or something. Right in front of a film. But wow, spiciness. Let's see what other people think. They say the palate of apple crumble. Yeah, I guess there is a hint of black pepper, as they say here. Um, but it's on the nose. You've got that lovely spice, vanilla, cinnamon, um, that maple syrup thing I can't get away from. And then it says here on the recipe, I think on the website I'm looking at, it says lingering rich sweetness of pecan pie. Kind of the same kind of shit I'm talking about, really, isn't it? Wow. So there are three rye whiskies, which are currently available in the UK if you look hard enough, or just go online and buy them. They'll be there the next day in most cases. Bringing us on to this. This was the Oxford Whiskey Distillery. The Oxford Distillery, yeah, yeah, as in Oxford, England. And this is an English whiskey brand, but they've moved up north to Yorkshire. I believe my friend Martin Miller, involved the Whiskey Magazine, very, very, very well known across the whiskey fraternity, done an incredible amount for whiskey, certainly the promotion of Japanese whiskies. He was the first person to bring uber premium Japanese whiskies into England. Did very well with that. But they've changed the name of the distillery to Fielden. Now, I know a Fielden, Christopher Fielden, who was a master of wine. I'm sure that he may be a relation, he may not be, but it's the name. And it says Harvest 2019 Rye Whiskey. It's a rather handsome bottle, as you can see, the cork in the top. Um, I was sent two bottles of this by Marcin because I haven't seen him for a very long time, and I was really touched. And then my wife drank one of the bottles, not all of it, but she did have a go, and I didn't tell her not to. And there were two bottles of it, so at least my wife appreciates it too. But this is 50% as well. It's 100 proof. This is a really delicious, delicious rye. It's English, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else. Oh, I love this. It's young, sure. It says Harvest 2019, so it's not that young. It has a wonderful smell. It reminds me of like fresh Novello peppery olive oil initially. Then you get this lovely, slightly vegetal kind of sorghum quality. and then the rye starts to kick in. It's not spicy. It's pure and fruity, more like the whistle pig, which I think I mentioned earlier on. If I didn't, yeah, whistle pig. There are certain ryes I think which are very very pure and clean, and don't have the spiciness. They kind of avoid that. It's a really wonderful whiskey. Well done, March, and everyone involved. It's not as loud. It's not as American. It's not as short block Chevrolet engine. It's more like a Lotus, lighter on its feet, but fast, swift, deft, racy, complex. Got the potential to age. You can see that over time the spirit is going to achieve a wonderful kind of amorphous whiskiness, maybe like a high altitude malt whiskey, like I don't know Dalwhinnie or something like that. It reminds me a little bit of Ben Nevis whiskey, actually. Very, very nice. Seriously good whiskey. And again, you're around your 50 quids, maybe slightly more, but it's the same price as the others. But don't think because it's English, it's not worth looking at, because that's absolutely delicious. And with my sensibilities, I think of all of these, if I had a bottle, the one that I go to most often, just to have a wee dram in front of an episode of Only Connect, is going to be the English one. I have to say, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think the Jack Daniels is wonderfully versatile, and I think I'd use that a lot in cocktails. The Sagamore Spirit, the Double Wood, which has won all these trophies recently, is really more like your Armagnac from bourbon country, and it's wonderful. It's like this rye has Armagnac qualities. Would be delicious post dinner with a coffee, and then this. I mean, make yippee ki please. The High West, wonderful, wonderful whiskies. There you go. It wasn't too long, was it? Half an hour. See you next time, and next time it'll be 2025.